Hey y'all, I'm Captain Pete, and welcome to the Florida Desk, your number one source for everything hunting, fishing, and Florida related. Join me as we talk about everything from conservation to legislation, big bus, big bucks, and more, all on the Florida Desk. For tips, tricks, and how to hunt and fish in Florida successfully, and everything you need to know to be a competent outdoorsman in the great Sunshine State. Stay tuned. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Florida Desk. Unfortunately, got some bad news to break to y'all today, and I'm sure some of y'all have already seen it, but Florida has confirmed its first official case of CWD from a deer in Holmes County, which is right on the border of Georgia. So we were going to do the snake debacle episode this week, but instead we are going to be covering the CWD. Way more pressing an issue right now. We will be doing that in the future, though. Just hang with us for the snake episode. I promise that is coming. But for today, we're going to go over CWD. And instead of me kind of explaining in my own words, we're just going to jump straight into it. And I'm going to read you guys the official statement that FWC put out on their website in regards to the issue. It says, FWC, FDASC, and partner agencies activate chronic wasting disease response plan after disease detected in Florida white-tailed deer. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, has confirmed that a road-killed 4.5-year-old female white-tailed deer in Holmes County, sampled during a routine surveillance activity, has tested positive for chronic wasting disease, or CWD. It is the first known case of CWD in Florida, a contagious disease of the brain and central nervous system that is fatal to deer. The first case of CWD in North America was described in mule deer in Colorado in 1967. Florida is one of the most recent of 31 states to detect the disease, which can also be confirmed in 4 Canadian provinces: Finland, Norway, Sweden, and South Korea. The FWC and its agency partners take CWD very seriously and have implemented a comprehensive response plan. As part of the plan, the FWC will collect samples from specific established zones to further assess the spread of the disease. The results from this initial sampling effort will inform resource managers so they can react with appropriate management strategies. The FWC has been monitoring free-range deer since 2002 to detect CWD. During that time, the FWC has tested approximately 17,500 hunter-killed, road-killed, and sick or deceased deer for CWD. In fiscal year 2020-2021, in addition to funds generated by hunting permits, $266,000 was appropriated by the Florida legislature to prepare the state's comprehensive response to prevent the spread of CWD. With the continued support of Governor DeSantis, the Florida legislator, and hunters across the state, we have taken significant steps to prevent the spread of CWD, said FWC Executive Director Roger Young. Working with FDACS and our other partners, I'm hopeful that our combined efforts will limit the effect this will have on Florida's deer population and preserve our exceptional hunting opportunities for future generations statewide. We take this very seriously, our responsibility to prevent, detect, and respond to animal health issues in Florida, all to safeguard our agricultural industry and our world-renowned wildlife and natural resources, said FDACS Commissioner Wilton Simpson. Ensuring the health of Florida's deer population is a team effort, and we will continue to work diligently with our state and federal partners to respond. The FWC is asking anyone who sees a sick, abnormally thin deer or finds a deer dead from unknown causes to call the CWD hotline, which is 1-866-CWD-WATCH or 1-866-293-9282. Once again, that's 1-866-CWD-WATCH or 1-866-293-9282 and report the animal's location. Currently, there is no scientific evidence that CWD can be transmitted to humans or livestock under natural conditions. However, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention do not recommend consuming meat from animals that test positive for CWD or from any sick animal. The FWC provides information about precautions people should take when pursuing or handling deer that may have been exposed to CWD. CWD is a contagious disease believed to be caused by an abnormal protein called a prion. It is a fatal disease for all members of the deer family and is currently documented in white-tailed deer, mule deer, Sitka deer, elk, moose, and caribou. Signs of the disease usually appear 1.5 to 3 years after initial exposure and can include weight loss and abnormal behaviors such as listlessness, lowering of the head, inattentiveness towards people, walking in circles, staggering, and standing with a wide stance. Controlling the spread of CWD is difficult once it becomes established in a natural population, because prions shed by infected deer persist in the environment. The best chance for controlling CWD is acting quickly after it has been detected to prevent more animals from becoming infected. CWD can be transmitted directly from animal to animal or indirectly from environment. Multiple management strategies will be employed to control the spread of the disease. The FWC, along with its partners, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Florida Department of Health and Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study will continue to update the public as more information becomes available. For more information, visit myfwc.com/CWD. All right, so that was the statement that FWC released on June 15th. Let's go over now just a little bit more in depth about what chronic wasting disease actually is. So, what is CWD? CWD is a progressive fatal disease that affects the brain, spinal cord, and many other tissues of farmed and free-ranging deer, elk, and moose. CWD belongs to a family of diseases called prion diseases, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs for short. Other TSEs include bovine spongiform encephalopathy in cattle, scrapie in sheep and goats, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and other human prion diseases in people, including a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, the human form of mad cow disease in people. The infection is believed to be caused by abnormal proteins called prions, which are thought to cause damage to other normal prion proteins that can be found in tissues throughout the body, but most often in the brain and spinal cord, leading to brain damage and development of prion diseases. Some of the known carriers of CWD are mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, and moose. Scientists think CWD spreads between animals through contact with contaminated body fluids and tissue, or indirectly through exposure to CWD in the environment, such as in drinking water or food. CWD affects many different species of hoofed animals, including North American elk or wapiti, the red deer, mule deer, black-tailed deer, white-tailed deer, Sitka deer, reindeer, and moose. Like other prion diseases, CWD may have an incubation period of over a year, and clear neurological signs may develop slowly. As CWD progresses, infected animals may have a variety of changes in behavior and appearance. These may include drastic weight loss, also known as wasting, stumbling, lack of coordination, listlessness, drooling, excessive thirst or urination, drooping ears, and lack of fear of people. It is often difficult to diagnose a deer, elk, or moose with CWD based on these symptoms alone, because many of CWD's symptoms also occur with other diseases and malnutrition. CWD is always fatal, and CWD does not appear to naturally infect cattle or other domesticated animals. So, there's a great video that really sums up what CWD does to deer without even needing to know much more about it. Like, forget everything we went over. It's just the perfect visual. And when I say great, visually it's far from that, but educationally it's invaluable. The deer in the video looks like a zombie, and it's just running in circles in one direction repeatedly with the tongue hanging out of its head. It's pretty gruesome, but there's no better video to show how serious this issue can become. One of the things that FWC did not mention in their post is statistically what has happened in other states and how CWD has decimated other states. They mentioned testing 17,500 deer, but they didn't mention how many deer have died in other states or how serious this could be. Florida is now the 31st state to have a positive CWD result. So I just kind of want to go over a little history of what has happened in the other 30 states that have confirmed cases of CWD as well. CWD was first recognized as a clinical wasting syndrome in 1967 in mule deer that were captive in a research facility in northern Colorado. It was identified as a TSE in 1978, and in the mid-1980s, CWC was first detected in free-ranging deer and elk in the contiguous portions of northeastern Colorado and southeastern Wyoming. In May of 2001, CWD also was found in free-ranging deer in the southwestern corner of Nebraska, adjacent to Colorado and Wyoming. At that time, the limited area of northern Colorado, southern Wyoming, and western Nebraska in which free-ranging deer and elk were positive for CWD was referred to as the original endemic area. Since 2001, CWD has been identified in free-ranging and farmed animals in a combined 30 states, and now 31 including Florida as of today. Farm cervid surveillance has been increasing each year since 1997 and is now an integral part of the USDA program to prevent and control CWD in farm cervid herds and wild cervid populations. In 2002, at the request of Congress, USDA and the U.S. Department of Interior worked with Senate to create a national plan to assist states, federal agencies, and Indian tribes in addressing CWD in both farmed and wild animals. Unfortunately, funding for the wildlife surveillance program was discontinued in 2012. USDA has continued to develop a national herd certification program with the goal to control and prevent the spread of CWD in farm cervids. The program includes requirements for fencing, animal identification, animal inventory, and continued surveillance testing for herd advancement. After 5 years of continual surveillance with no evidence of disease, a herd is considered to be certified and can move animals via interstate. Like the causative agent of scrapie and bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, the agent responsible for CWD has not been completely characterized. The CWD agent is thought to be an abnormal prion protein. It is smaller than the most viral particle and does not evoke a traditional whole-body immune response in the host animal, but does cause neuroinflammation. On the basis of experience with other TSE agents, the CWD agent is assumed to be resistant to enzymes and chemicals that normally break down proteins, as well as to heat and normal disinfection procedures. Currently, definitive diagnosis is based on IHC testing of the obex area of the brainstem or the medial retropharyngeal lymph nodes. Gross lesions seen at necropsy reflect the clinical signs of CWD. Primary emaciation and sometimes aspiration pneumonia, which may be the primary acute cause of death. Approved diagnostic testings have been limited to IHAC and ELISA. Research is being conducted to develop live animal diagnostic tests for CWD. The rectal biopsy test, which has not yet been approved for routine regulatory testing, appears promising but may have limited applicability due to the number of positive animals in the early stages of the disease that may not be affected. Official CWD tests are performed only at APHIS-approved university, state, or federal veterinary diagnostic laboratories. If the animal to be tested is a farm deer or elk, accredited veterinarians should check with federal or state regulatory veterinarians for information on sample collection and appropriate sample submission. If the animal to be sampled is a wild deer or elk that is suspected of having CWD, accredited veterinarians should inform state and federal authorities and work with their state wildlife management agency to find out how officials would like the sample to be collected and submitted. If the animal to be sampled is a clinically normal wild animal that an individual hunter would like tested, accredited veterinarians should also work with their state wildlife management agency or Department of Agriculture to find out how to best proceed. Several approved laboratories exist with sufficient capacity to provide fee-for-service testing for samples collected by individual hunters. Accredited veterinarians should always check with the diagnostic laboratory to make sure samples are properly collected, packaged, and shipped. And this is all information from the United States Department of Agriculture, better known as the USDA. So if you guys want to go on there and read some of this, you can check it all out on there. CWD was first documented in the 1960s, and determining if the disease could cause a decline in deer population has been really difficult for several reasons. First, survey techniques for deer populations are not super precise, so many years of survey often are necessary to detect the changes. Second, deer populations are influenced by many natural and human-caused factors other than CWD, so it makes it really difficult to understand the primary cause of population decline. And finally, CWD is a disease that takes years to develop in deer and decades to have significant effects on deer populations. So just to touch on this a little bit, there's been 3 recent studies that have measured survival rate and reproduction of deer with CWD. And it showed that the survival rate of CWD-positive deer was 20 to 40% lower than CWD-negative deer. So there was, interestingly enough, no difference between reproductive rates as a result of CWD status, and one of the studies had population monitoring programs showing decline in population size of 40 to 50% in the past 10 to 20 years. In all 3 of the studies, reproductive rates and mortality rates were used to calculate the annual changes in population sizes as a result of CWD, and populations with CWD had declined by 3 to 20% per year, where similar areas normally would have been stable or increasing if they did not have CWD. What does this all mean exactly, and what do these studies mean? So the first thing is that CWD can cause declines in deer population, but the effects may take 25 or more years to be apparent. So we may, if so, first case with CWD was disclosed today, basically, right? And today's what, June 15th. So it's June 15th, 2023. So we may not see the effects of what's going to take place in the deer population until June 15th of 2048. That's 25 years away. We may not know what's going on. Second, the population level effects of any of the diseases may vary geographically. So monitoring and research is important to understand the effects of CWD on deer populations. CWD will result in lower deer harvest rates over the long term because of the lower survival imposed by CWD. Yet high harvest rates may be necessary in the short term to prevent the disease from spreading by reducing deer density. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to how to properly manage these issues, but some things experts and sportsmen agree on. So I'm going to touch on a few of those and go into a little detail as to how and why they're possibly affecting the issue of spreading chronic wasting disease, how outdoorsmen and hunters can be more proactive when it comes to preventing the spread of CWD on a personal level. And I'm also going to touch on what we should be as hunters asking for the agency, because there is a set standard and practice in other places in the country. And I think the earlier that FWC gets on and adopts that, the better off we're going to be in the long run. And it's going to take us to go out there and ask them for this, because not to sit here and badmouth the agency, but as we can tell from prior issues that have happened in the state, you don't get a lot unless you ask for it. So it's really the responsibles of the hunters. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to speak up and do it anyway. We're the people that are out in the woods the most. We're the people that are out there putting in the time. We're the people that best understand what is going on with deer. And quite frankly, the responsibility falls on us. My sympathy for people when they say that FWC doesn't do a good job goes only so far if they're not being proactive in it as well. All right, so before we talk about some of the leading factors and some of the ways that CWD is spreading around the country, I want to talk about a statement that the Georgia Department of Natural Resources put out today. And I'll just give it a quick read. This was published today at it's 13:30, so 1:30 this afternoon. Sorry, my military conversion time is off. It says, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, announced today that chronic wasting disease has been detected in a road-killed deer sampled for routine surveillance in Holmes County, Florida. A first for that state. CWD has not been detected in the state of Georgia, according to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Resource Division, WRD. The department is prepared and will work diligently to implement its CWD response protocol if the disease is ever detected in Georgia. WRD has conducted annual surveillance for CWD since 2002. Chronic wasting disease is a fatal neurological disease of deer, elk, and moose caused by infectious proteins called prions. Currently, there are no treatments, and the disease always results in the death of an infected animal. What does CWD look like on a deer? Often, CWD deer infected look completely normal, which is why transport regulations are so important. Over time, symptoms appear. Dramatic weight loss, poor body condition, subtle head tremors may occur. Head and ears may be droopy, and in the last stages, it is not uncommon for the animal to have excessive drooling. If you observe a deer with any of these symptoms, please contact your local WRD Game Management Office, georgiawildlife.com/about/contact#GM. To date, CWD has not been known to be transmissible to humans, but per the Center of Disease Control website, known CWD-positive deer should not be consumed. How can you help prevent the spread? Hunters are advised that live importation of all deer species from other states is prohibited and has been since 2005. Georgia hunters that hunt out of state may only bring home boned-out meat, hides, skulls, or skull caps with antlers attached, and all soft tissue removed. Velvet antlers are okay. Jawbones with no soft tissue, elk ivories, and finished taxidermy mounts. All other carcass parts must be left behind. CWD-positive states and locations are Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Florida, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Wyoming, as well as Canadian provinces Alberta, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. For more information, visit the WRD website at georgiawildlife.com/CWD. So, the reason that I wanted to read Georgia's statement first was because of where this took place in the state of Florida. Holmes County is on the northwest part of the Panhandle. It borders the state of Georgia. And interestingly enough, Georgia has never had a CWD case, which I have to assume then that the deer possibly came from Alabama because Alabama has CWD. The only problem with that is that the concentration of CWD in Alabama is focused in the north part of the state, a couple hundred miles away from Florida, so it would have been a real far walk and a large contamination trail along the way. Or the other possibility is that it came from one of the numerous high fence or deer breeding facilities in that area. And it's a real controversial topic, y'all, but the numbers and the data back up what I'm saying. Nationwide, the overall occurrence for CWD in free-ranging deer and elk is relatively low. Where there are sections of CWD that's been established, so like, for example, out west in Colorado where I hunt, they actually give you, when you apply for tags, they give you the breakdown and it says like CWD is less than 5%, CWD is 5%, CWD is 5 to 10%, or CWD is 10% more in the area that you're applying for. So where the disease is established, the infection rates may exceed 10%, and localized infection rates can reach upwards of 25%, which is 1 in 4 animals for deer and elk. Now the infection rates among captive deer can be with a rate of 79%, and that's nearly 4 in 5 reported from captive herds that were surveyed. So the captive deer and breeding industry, and whether that's high fence or like breeding industries where guys will breed bucks for genetics to grow out massive racks for guys who like to, in a nice way to put it, like to pretend that they're hunters and they go in and shoot like a caged animal. And I'm not against, I want to tread lightly here. I'm not against going out and hunting for, if people can prove that CWD isn't being propagated in these high fence hunts, I have no personal qualm with someone going out there and shooting an animal within a fence. I don't call that hunting. I call that like harvesting, I guess you could say, or like going to the store. If it's like just like get like more of like a farm to table type of deal, like I don't have a problem with someone going out there and shooting an animal if they're going to eat it all. Where I have a little bit of an issue is where people start calling that hunting, and then they take grip and grins, and then they tell a different story than what happened when, you know, they really sat over a pile of food. And that's effectively where it breaks down, is the pile of food, because you'll hear a lot of chatter about how it's high fence operations or about how it is captive breeding facilities. And then on the other hand, you'll hear people say, oh, well, you know, it's the corn. And I think that those two things get separated, but they're really pretty conjoined, because CWD is proliferated when a bunch of deer are up there rubbing noses together and being all friendly. And when you have an excess amount of deer in these farms or in these high fence operations, that's when the disease starts to like proliferate. And it's mainly because they have 1,000-pound feeders out there, and like they just have troughs full of corn and troughs full of water, and all those animals are sharing that exact same food source and that exact same water. So everything's just getting passed around. And you go, okay, well, they're in a fenced-in area, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that deer are social animals, so deer will go up and, as we talked about in the scouting episode for sheds, deer will walk those fence lines, right? So deer are walking down those fence lines. Well, the fence is two-sided, the captive deer are walking down one side and the wild deer are walking down the other. So they're meeting at the fence, mingling, rubbing noses together. And then that's how it's getting passed around and transmitted. So yeah, the feeding is an issue, and it is legal to bait for deer in the state of Florida. I lightly touched on that in the prior episode without knowing that this was going to happen, obviously. And yeah, I guess we can dive into it now. I am not a fan of baiting for deer. I don't think it's sportsmanlike. I don't think it's like, I think it's like not, I don't want to say it's not fair chase. It's just to me, like I don't get the excitement of sitting a couple 100 yards away from a corn pile and shooting something with the rifle. Like that doesn't get me fired up. That's not how I like to hunt. On top of that, it's getting to the point where these corn piles can be affecting and can be proliferating CWD. If there was one confirmed case so far, I got bad news. There's at least another deer out there that's contagious as well, because it's a transmittable disease. Like it just doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's transferred from animal to animal. So I'm not a huge fan of corn. I don't like seeing corn get dropped out mainly because of this. I also don't necessarily like to see people just go out into the woods and drop corn randomly where they think deer is going to hang out. Because especially down in Florida, and I can even post some pictures of this, I'd have to find some, but there's been spots down here where you'll just be walking through the woods, you'll find the game camera, and then you'll find a massive hole in the middle of what once was like lush green vegetation because someone just decided to drop a pile of corn there. And then the deer that they're presumably looking for didn't even come eat it. It was like pigs that came and tore it up. And it's just kind of like, it's not very, I don't know how to say this. Like, it's not classy. I don't feel like, in a way. I just feel like it's lazy. Like it's just lazy hunting. So that specific incident that I was talking about actually took place on public land. So not only is it detrimental to the environment, but it's also illegal to bait in the state of Florida on public land. You are, however, allowed to bait and drop corn on private land. And that's kind of been one of my gripes with the agency, is I don't like that they distinguish public and private and what's legal and what's not, especially in times we're in right now. Going forward, I truly believe that the agency should be responsible for making a blanket banning of all baiting in the state of Florida. And I would even go as far as to say there should be a ban on all artificial feeding, meaning that if it doesn't grow from the ground, you shouldn't be able to use it to feed or supplement corn, whether commercially, private, public, any form of any sort of management of deer. And just to clarify what I'm saying, I personally believe that any sort of food source that you're putting out that is not grown from the ground should not be used. So if you can't plant it and it doesn't go through the seasons and doesn't go through a harvest cycle and doesn't physically either start from seed or from plant and grow into a functioning tree or source of food, then you shouldn't be able to just go dump food out on the ground for deer. I believe that you should have to plant things if you want deer to eat from them. Put them in the ground. Better the environment, better your piece of property. If it's public land, I'm sorry, it's that falls on the management of the state. There is a responsibility to not mess up public land that we have as people of the outdoors and hunters and anglers. And one of those things requires us to be stewards of the land. So that means not dumping out there. And I'm sorry, if that means that the area that you're hunting isn't super hot, or there isn't the right food source, or there isn't this, or there isn't that, then reach out to the state. You guys have to go out there and talk to them and say, hey, look, this is how this area could be better managed. And if you're a private land guy, you have to better manage your land. There's too many ways that are known and that work when it comes to property management for people to still be out there baiting corn. And yeah, it takes a lot more work to get your property in the shape that it needs to be to hunt successfully. But you know what? In the end, it's better for you. It's better for the resale value. It's better for the deer. It's better for the ecosystem. It's better for everything. Not to sit here and sound like a prude when it comes to dropping some corn out, because I know it's done in a lot of places, and I know it's like it's just what is done in a lot of areas. But At the end of the day, we got to put the wildlife first. And if you think about putting the wildlife first, the wildlife don't benefit from corn. If you own private land, what's really beneficial to the deer on your property and what'll really turn them into nice bucks is the correct and proper management of your land, making sure that there's good water sources, making sure that there's good cover, making sure that there's good planted feed. There's a lot of ways to attract and get deer into an area that doesn't require you dropping corn and doesn't require a bunch of deer to also all be up together rubbing noses and spreading CWD. Another way that CWD was possibly spread to Florida was through the transportation of deer, whether to deer farms or high fence hunting, or just from another state via hunter. And remember, this disease takes time to develop inside of the deer once it's infected. So this could have potentially started anywhere at any point in the last year or so in the area in Holmes County where the deer is found affected. So it isn't an unrealistic situation that a hunter may have traveled out of state, went hunting in another state that has known cases of CWD, killed a CWD infected animal, and then returned back home with that state in the processed form or the trophy, as in a European mount or a taxidermied mount. And then CWD was spread through that. That is also very, very plausible to take place. So in order to kind of help y'all prevent that from happening, I'm going to lay out a little bit of what the state recommends and what some of the other states that have had CWD recommend. So let's jump into some ways that you can protect yourself and what precautions you should be taking when handling deer or when dealing with a suspected CWD infected deer. So the first thing that you want to do is inspect the body condition of each deer at the time of harvest. Do not consume any parts of the animal exhibiting the disease, especially the clinical symptoms of CWD that include extreme weight loss, excessive salivation, and or erratic behavior. Always wear rubber or latex gloves when handling deer carcass. And this is just something you should be doing in practice anyway. And honestly, before CWD, I was doing this not to protect me from the deer, but to protect the deer from me. You're dealing with a lot of sharp knives when you're cutting stuff. You're dealing with all sorts of blades, all sorts of bones that are sticking out. A lot of times, I nick myself all the time with a knife. When you're using knives and you just have, there's a possibility to nick yourself. And I feel like there's some sort of little barrier there. And I don't know, maybe it's mental, but it's just always a good idea. Plus, you just don't have to wash your hands. You're not touching raw meat and then touching something else. Your hands that may be dirty aren't getting on the meat. All around safe practice to do. Something you should be doing anyway. When field dressing an animal, leave the internal organs and the inedible parts at the site of the harvest. Some places in some states say to bury them and bury them 8 feet deep at least. I think that's a great idea. I don't know. I don't think you could even dig a hole in Florida 8 feet deep in most spots. Or if you could, it would take a lot of time. A foot or two. I'm not giving out science tips here. I'm not pretending to know something. I'm just, from a practical perspective, if you can get it down a foot or two and put some dirt on top of it, that's probably good enough. Do not process a deer that appears to be diseased. Process all deer individually, package separately, and label it uniquely. That way, if you have a couple deer that you've harvested over the season and there's testing or something that's done and it gets back, you can just throw away all of the one deer if only one out of a couple of deer are positive. That way you have it all nicely marked, there's no confusion, and you can discard what meat is appropriate to discard and keep what meat is appropriate to keep. Avoid sawing through bone, spinal cord, brain, lymph nodes, and/or spleen. Store all portions of the animal to be transported in a container, such as a cooler, bin, or bag that will not leak bodily fluids into the environment. All right, in the field, debone all the meat from the deer and remove all the fat, connective tissue, and lymph nodes. Avoid eating or handling the eyes, brain, spinal cord, spleen, and lymph nodes. I gotta be honest with you, I've never looked at the brain and been like, that's appetizing. Cutting away all fatty tissue will remove remaining lymph nodes. Limit the amount of bodily fluids going to an area, such as a floor drain that cannot be properly sanitized after use. Clean processing equipment between each deer. And thoroughly sanitize all equipment with a 50-50 solution of bleach and water. Soak tools for 1 hour in bleach solution and then rinse thoroughly with hot water. Wash hands and instruments thoroughly afterwards. Deer parts should never be rendered for use in feed for other animals or used as compost, and deer remains should be left at the harvest site, but remains of animals being processed elsewhere should be double bagged and sent to an approved lined landfill or buried at least 8 feet or deeper. If you have a deer commercially processed, request your animal be processed individually with no meat from other animals added to yours. Yeah, so this is going to change how I process my deer. And in Florida here, we have super sandy and dirt-based environments. So unless you're hunting in the pines, and even then, I don't typically field dress my kills where I harvest them. Normally I carry or cart them out and then dispose of the inedible or unusable parts later. It is going to change the way that I hunt. I do a lot of late evening sits, like into sundown, right into the end of legal shooting light. It just got to be prepared now to be out there in the middle of the night doing this. I mean, it only takes to quarter a deer properly, and to get the back straps and to get all the usable parts off of it. In Florida, the deer aren't massive, so it takes a little bit, anywhere between an hour and some change to get it all broken down. That's usually the quickest part. But when you do it at home, or when you do it in a controlled setting, you have ice, and that's one of the biggest things down here. Archery season is in parts of the year that are typically still fairly warm. So meat spoilage is a big thing down here. That's why I just usually, once the deer's down and I have it, I just get it, I go, and I just get it home and get it moving. Because regardless of what you do, you want to get it moving. It just adds time, though, until you get it to ice. Because if it's down on the ground and then you process it, and then say you still have to transport it an hour home, if you're doing it by vehicle, that's fine. You can stop at a gas station. But if you're doing it in a place where you're walking out, or you're walking in to a truck, or maybe you're going in by boat, or maybe you're going in by whatever, it just adds more time that deer is down and that deer is basically not being cooled. And it's hot most times of the year. There's 2 or 3 days out of the season that I would feel comfortable leaving a deer hanging, and it would only be for the rest of that day, because the following day it could be 60 or 70 degrees. Just to put it into perspective, this is not places where it's like 20 degrees consistently and you can leave a deer in the woods. So it is going to add some challenges. It is going to make you want to be proficient with your cutting skills before you go out. If you haven't killed a deer yet and you haven't had a chance to cut one up, highly recommend going and looking on YouTube and finding some videos and seeing some examples and demonstrations. So that way, at least your first time out, you have a general idea. And the first time you do it, it's pretty easy. We'll have an episode in the future where I'm talking about all this, and we'll go over this as well. But for right now, just start being prepared, because we're only a couple months out from hunting season, and with the announcement of CWD taking place, there's going to be a lot of drastic changes that are going to have to be made in some of your approach this year, and just the way that you handle some things. So it's good to get a start on now, and that's why we're jumping right into this and talking about it today instead of waiting a couple weeks, because this information is really going to shake up how people are hunting this year. So what else can we be doing as outdoorsmen to help prevent the spread of CWD? One of the other things that we can do is we can just watch what we're using when we're hunting. And when I say that, I mean aerosol sprays. A lot of people like to use scent, and a lot of people like to use specifically doe estrus. And that's good, but just check the back of the bottles on the ones that you're using before you spray them in the woods. Make sure that some sort of CWD testing was done. And I even like to do follow-up and check the company's website and see what kind of CWD testing was done. Or just give them a shout and just say, hey, what are you guys doing? Just more information for you, another way to better educate yourself, and just another way to be cautious about spreading something so detrimental around in the woods. One piece of good news that relates to CWD management is on December 8, 2021, H.R. 5608, the Chronic Wasting Disease Research and Management Act, passed the House. The bill directs the Department of Agriculture, USDA, to address chronic wasting disease afflicting deer, elk, and moose populations. Specifically, the bill directs USDA to establish a program to research and manage the disease. Under the program, USDA must offer to enter into agreements with state or tribal wildlife agencies and departments of agriculture, institutions of higher education, and research centers to support research on the transmission of, resistance to, and diagnosis of the disease. The USDA must also offer to enter into agreements with such agencies and departments to support state and tribal efforts to develop and implement management strategies that address the disease. The USDA must also develop and maintain materials to inform the public on chronic wasting disease and techniques to help prevent the spread of the disease. In addition, the USDA must solicit public feedback on potential updates and improvements to standards of the Chronic Wasting Disease Herd Certification Program. The CWD Research Management Act would split $70 million annually through fiscal year 2028 on management and research priorities. This includes $35 million per year for research that would focus on methods to effectively detect CWD in live and harvested deer and the surrounding environment, best practices for reducing CWD occurrence through sustainable harvest of deer and other cervids, and factors contributing to spread of the disease locally, such as animal movement and scavenging. Another $35 million per year would be allocated for management, including surveillance and testing, and would prioritize areas with the highest incidence of CWD, areas responding to new outbreaks of CWD, areas without CWD that show the greatest risk of CWD emerging, jurisdictions demonstrating the greatest financial commitment to managing, monitoring, surveying, and researching CWD, and efforts to develop comprehensive policies and programs focused on CWD management. The bill also includes authorization for federal, state, and tribal agencies to develop educational materials to inform the public on CWD and direct the U.S. Department of Agriculture to review its herd certification program, which accredits captive deer operations as low risk for CWD contamination, but has been proven inadequate to stem the spread of the disease. The Captive Herd Certification Program represents an area where we still have much work to do, says Andrew Earl, TRCP's Director of Government Relations. By passing this legislation today, Congress has set us up for the next phase, in which the USDA must hold the captive deer industry accountable for its role in the rampant spread of CWD. Hunters will be pushing for the department to take a hard look at the persistent failures of the herd certification program and identify specific ways to strengthen it. So, just one thing to keep and remember when talking about all this. To date, no state has been successful when taking this approach, even though extra seasons, longer seasons, no limit on hunter harvest, earn-a-buck regulations, and even rewards have been employed. Reasons for this lack of success vary, but the most likely reasons include hunters want to harvest only a limited number of deer as they only have so much room in their freezer. Hunters have limitations on the amount of time that they can spend out hunting, and they also prefer to hunt in areas where deer densities are higher, so they discontinue hunting in areas with low densities, even though disease management may require continued harvest to reach lower levels. Another issue is that hunter access can be limited in particular urbanized areas. So, human safety concerns and posting of land and other regulations result in significant deer refuges from hunting. And hunters are more likely to avoid disease areas than flock to them. So, it's difficult to focus hunter harvest in specific locations where it's most needed and impacts can be had. And this brings up one little final point that I just want to touch on. When people see urban or they see residential, I feel like they think, oh, you can't hunt over there. But there are laws in the state of Florida that allow you to hunt on basically any size parcel. Now, not with a rifle. That is limited to archery, but still, it is able to get it done, and you are able to do it. Now, there are HOA rules, and there are like community organization rules and stuff like that, or maybe city ordinances. So check all your local laws, but don't think that because a lot is only an acre or a quarter of an acre, or maybe 5 acres, that you can't not hunt on it. You can legally hunt on it, given there aren't other stipulations in place. And as hunters facing the CWD problem, we really need to spread out. I mean, public land is cool and public land is awesome, but this is an issue that doesn't just stay on public land or doesn't just stay on private land. It travels and knows no boundaries. So we really need to start critically thinking so we can continue to hunt in our great state and continue to enjoy all the natural resources and amazing hunting opportunities we have. So on that note, guys, do some more research, sift around. I'm going to post some links on Instagram with some pictures. This is also on YouTube. Yeah, we started the YouTube channel last week. We're just going to be posting all the same stuff. There's no video content for right now. I just don't have the time to make these in the videos, but I will be posting all this stuff on YouTube. So we're trying to get it to a few different platforms. So please share it with your friends. As always, I'm Captain Pete. Catch me on Instagram at CAPT_Pete. or at the Florida desk. Feel free to shoot us questions, anything you have. We'll be happy to get back to you and let you know. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. As always, hunt hard, fish smart, and stay safe.